If you open a map of Africa right now and compare it with maps from decades ago, it's easy to see that the green areas and vegetation have disappeared very quickly, replaced by the yellow color of the desert. In fact, even while you're watching this documentary, they are still continuing to expand. In North Africa, the hottest desert in the world and the second largest on Earth, the Sahara, has almost completely swallowed Algeria and Libya, stretching across 11 countries with an area of 9.2 million square kilometers, nearly the size of the United States, but soon it will be even larger than the US. According to NOAA, the Sahara has expanded by 10% in just 100 years, and research published in Climate Dynamics shows that from 1920 to 2013, it grew by an additional 800,000 square kilometers, bigger than Pakistan. But the massive size of the Sahara is not as frightening as what it causes. The desert doesn't just kill soil and kill plants. It also brings drought, hunger, failed harvests, and even forced migration. In the Sahel region, the Sahara's boundary moves southward by 50-70 kilometers every year. More than 30 million people have been forced to leave their villages. In Niger and Mauritania, villages that once had 10,000 residents now have only about 2,000 people holding on. And in 2022 alone, in Somalia, drought caused by desertification forced 1.7 million people to leave their homes. Of course, along with the expansion of the desert, the world has tried many different methods. In Burkina Faso, farmers dig zai pits, small holes that hold water and livestock manure. This method once saved entire fields that had died from drought in the 1980s. In Algeria and Libya, people use qanat and fogara, underground water channels that are thousands of years old. And in Eritrea, fog harvesting nets placed on mountain slopes can call in 20-30 liters of water every day. But all of these solutions are far too small compared to a Sahara that is expanding by tens of kilometers each year. They return to the simplest method, planting trees. But not ordinary trees. The Great Green Wall, an 8,000-kilometer tree barrier stretching across the continent, twice the length of California and 15 kilometers wide, with 20 countries participating. This is the largest green megaproject on the planet. But after 15 years, do you know how much of the project has been completed? 18%, and it has cost more than $14 billion. To be blunt, it was a failure. In Senegal, Ethiopia, and Chad, the survival rate of young trees is only 10-20% in some places because the soil is too poor, temperatures reach up to 50 degrees Celsius, and groundwater levels continue to fall. To help the trees survive better, what do you think they did? Add more water. That's not correct. They raised bees. Hearing desert and bees, you might think they have nothing to do with each other, right? The truth is that many native tree species like acacia, balanites, and moringa only bloom for exactly 24 hours, and they depend 80-100% on insect pollination. Without bees, there are no seeds and no next generation of trees. So in 2023, the United Nations, together with African governments, carried out an unprecedented experiment, sedating bees with deep cold, keeping them in a hibernation state for more than 2 weeks, shipping them by sea, and then releasing them right into the center of the Sahara, where you would never imagine anything could survive. And then something unexpected happened. The areas where bees appeared began to turn green 2-3 times faster. Tree survival rates increased significantly, seeds spread farther, and vegetation recovered. It sounds easy, doesn't it? But the process did not happen quickly or easily at all, and there was even a time when they almost created another disaster. But before understanding the specific mechanism of how these bees work, let's review a little about their true role. And we'll say this up front. Their role is bigger than anything most people have ever imagined. Bees are not just honey-making insects. In the United States, 1/3 of crops, from apples and almonds to blueberries, depend on bees. The almond industry in California alone needs more than 2 million beehives every year, to the point where people call it the largest bee migration in the world. In Europe, 80% of crops and wildflowers require bee pollination. Without bees, plants cannot reproduce, herbivores collapse, predators collapse, and the entire ecosystem falls like dominoes. Want to understand how serious this is? Look at southwest China, where bees have nearly disappeared because of pesticides and deforestation. Farmers have to climb each pear and apple branch and use paintbrushes to dab pollen onto every single flower. Try imagining how long it will take before robots or drones can replace bees. The most realistic answer is not yet. Current technology can pollinate only one flower per second, while a single bee colony can pollinate hundreds of thousands of flowers per day. And wherever bees return, life explodes again like a reverse domino effect. In Costa Rica, when forests began to recover, the return of bees caused seed dispersal to increase dramatically, bringing back birds, insects, and even predators. The ecosystem came back to life in the literal sense. But if bees are so important, why not release a huge number of them into the Sahara right away? This is exactly where the biggest barrier lies: temperature. You can plant trees, you can bring in water, but you can't fool bees. Don't forget, this is not an ordinary desert. It is the hottest desert on the planet. Let me give you an idea. Inside a healthy beehive, the ideal temperature is around 35 degrees. Once it exceeds 40 degrees, larvae begin to die, and the wax starts to soften. Remember that beeswax is also candle wax. When candles meet heat, they melt. A beehive is the same. Think about it. In the Sahara, temperatures can reach more than 50 degrees Celsius, even in the shade, so how long do you think a normal beehive could survive? To help you understand how sensitive bees are, let's go to another hot place. In Nevada, which has more than 1,000 native bee species, the population has dropped sharply since the early 2000s due to abnormal heat waves. There have been summers where beehives literally melted, forcing bees to abandon their colonies and fly north to find cooler areas. Or take Inzeri village in Morocco, where heat and drought in 2019 wiped out almost the entire local bee population, causing residents to lose their main income from honey. What's remarkable is that bees are not stupid at all. They have extremely sophisticated temperature regulation mechanisms. In winter, they keep warm by clustering together, sealing cracks, and simply buzzing. That's right, the sounds we hear from the outside actually help them generate heat. In summer, it's the opposite. To avoid overheating, worker bees fly back and forth all day, creating airflow. And when the weather becomes truly hot, foragers don't just bring back nectar and pollen, they bring back water too. It evaporates and cools the inside of the hive. Some bees even fan their wings like tiny ventilation fans to keep air moving. But what's the problem? All of these skills only work below 38-40 degrees Celsius. And the Sahara? It crosses that threshold almost every day for months on end. An FAO expert once stated bluntly, "Putting European bees in the Sahara is like dropping a goldfish into boiling water." So the answer is very clear, almost absolute. Using normal honeybees will definitely fail. To make the experiment successful, humanity had to find a type of bee that was not afraid of heat and not afraid of drought. So scientists began searching across Africa and the Middle East. And surprisingly, the answer not only existed, but there were even several different bee species. The first species is the East African honeybee. Smaller than European bees, their bodies release heat more quickly, like a small engine that is less likely to overheat. They evolved over many generations in conditions of drought, scarce food, and temperatures that constantly exceeded 40 degrees Celsius. But to survive, nature also imposed a price. They are more aggressive. A researcher in Kenya said, "This is the kind of bee where if you're slow by 1 second, you'll pay with 100 stings." Even so, their heat tolerance is far superior to that of European honeybees. Next are the Nubian and Arabian honeybees, which live along the southern edge of the Sahara and the Arabian Peninsula, where temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius are almost normal. They look very different. Smaller, paler yellow, shorter hair, and they form smaller colonies to avoid heat suffocation. Genetic analyses show that many sections of their DNA are responsible for heat regulation and rapid responses to environmental stress, traits that temperate zone bees do not have at all. In daily life, they behave differently, all for the purpose of surviving heat that would kill other bee species. In short, you cannot release normal bees into the Sahara Desert. The climate will destroy them, but with these species, it can actually work. At the very least, they finally have a real chance. By the way, just 15 years ago, in the middle of the Sahara Desert, people actually found bees. Real, living honeybees, still working, just lost in the sand. At the Kufra Oasis, right on the northern edge of the desert, scientists discovered a bee population that had been isolated there for about 10,000 years. Imagine that! These colonies, through countless generations, were surrounded by sand and completely cut off from the rest of the world. Technically, they are still part of the honeybee species Apis mellifera, the same bees that pollinate apples, melons, nuts, vegetables, and are responsible for 1/3 of the Earth's food supply. But when researchers analyzed their genes, they found something no one expected. The Kufra bees carried completely distinct genetic markers, as if they had evolved on their own separate path. According to the research team, these bees may have settled in Kufra 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, right when the climate suddenly shifted and transformed a lush green grassland into what we now call the Sahara Desert. At that time, around 11,000 years ago, the Sahara was not the deadly place it is today. There were lakes, rivers, grasslands, and forests. Africa was once a green, thriving continent before it dried out and turned to sand, but that is the topic of another video. If these super bees truly exist and can survive at the edge of the Sahara, what would they bring to Africa? And the answer, frankly speaking, could transform the entire agricultural system of the continent. First, the return of bees means the return of pollination. This sounds simple, but its impact is enormous. In Africa, many regions of the Sahel can grow oil crops, legumes, and native fruit trees, but yields are low because they lack pollinating insects. With bees, yields could increase 2 to 3 times, crop diversity would rise significantly, and farmers could shift from subsistence farming to commercial production. To understand the economic power of bees, look at the rest of the world. In the United States, wild bees contribute about $3.1 billion per year, and when domesticated honeybees are included, the number rises to more than $15 billion. Without bees, half of the fruits and vegetables in supermarkets would disappear. That is never an exaggeration. It's an estimate from the USDA. And if you want to know how well bees can operate in extreme heat and dryness, look at the Arava Desert in Israel, one of the driest regions on Earth, resembling the surface of the moon. Here, farmers rent beehives and place them in the middle of their fields. Clean air, low pollution, and few parasites keep the colonies healthy and effective at pollination. The result? More than 50% of Israel's agricultural output is produced right in this desert region. You may remember, or you may not know, but today, bees around the world are facing a long list of threats: pesticides, habitat loss, heat stress, and especially Varroa destructor, the parasitic mite that kills more bees than all other diseases combined. Varroa clings to bees, sucks their body fluids, weakens the colony, and even worse, it carries the deformed wing virus, the cause of adult bees developing twisted, useless wings and dying after just a few days. Since the 1990s, the world has recorded the phenomenon of mass bee die-offs, and every year, at least 1/3 of all hives disappear. Viruses from Varroa have spread to 18 other insect species, making the problem even harder to control. No country is spared. Australia used to be the Varroa-free continent, but by 2022, to understand how dangerous it was, they had to spend $130 million in New South Wales alone when an outbreak forced them to destroy 28,000 beehives, equivalent to 40 million bees. Yet, even after mass destruction, Varroa still came back. The irony is that Varroa truly becomes catastrophic only for European honeybees, the species that produces most of the world's honey and commercial pollination, because they have no defensive mechanisms at all. In contrast, Asian honeybees have evolved over thousands of years to groom off, bite, or remove the mites from their hives. But the Sahara, more precisely, extremely hot, extremely dry regions, is an environment where Varroa cannot survive. And this is the golden opportunity. If heat-tolerant bee species like East African bees, Nubian bees, or Kufra bees are bred and expanded along the edge of the Sahara, they could create a biological safety zone where Varroa can barely penetrate, allowing healthy bees to reproduce, maintain clean genetics, and then spread outward again. But the story doesn't end with bees saving trees, or even saving bees themselves. When bees return to the edges of the desert, the entire food chain of the Sahara begins to move like an old machine starting up again. Because bees don't just make honey to feed honey badgers. Honey badgers are one of the fiercest animals in Africa, to the point that National Geographic calls them the world's most fearless animal. BBC also calls them the animal that knows no fear. They eat bee larvae, insects, turtles, lizards, snakes, eggs, and even small mammals. Thanks to skin as thick as armor, they are almost never harmed by bee stings. You can re-watch recorded footage from Kenya or Namibia. Honey badgers attacking cobras within minutes, taking venom, falling asleep for a while, then waking up as if nothing happened. And here's the important reason. When trees appear, farms appear. When farms appear, snakes will arrive. This has been documented in the Sahel region and also in Morocco. Wherever there is water and vegetation, snakes from nearby areas show up immediately. Meanwhile, snakes are native residents of the Sahara. From harmless species to vipers with necrotizing venom, all of them hide beneath the sand. And when there are trees, shade, and newly formed farms, snakes from neighboring regions will move in to search for food and water. Many studies warn that greening the desert may lead to an increase in predators, but that is exactly where the honey badger enters the equation. But like every major ecological story in human history, behind all the bright benefits, there is always a dark side we are forced to confront. The first problem comes from the temperament of the heat-tolerant bee species themselves. African bees are already known for being more aggressive than European bees. This isn't because they are evil, but because thousands of years living in environments full of predators, extreme heat, and constant survival pressure have forced them to become tougher. But do you remember what happened in Latin America? In the 1950s, when African bees were accidentally crossbred with European bees, a hybrid species, super strong, super fast, super aggressive, emerged and spread from Brazil all the way to the United States. People called them Africanized killer bees, and reports show they caused hundreds of deaths over several decades. This makes the question much more serious. If African bees are introduced into the Sahara in large numbers, could they move beyond the desert's edge and spread into the Mediterranean or even Europe? If that happens, they could outcompete local bees and push already weakened species toward extinction. A specialist from the European Bee Institute once warned, when a bee strain that is too strong enters a new ecosystem, it doesn't knock on the door and ask for permission. It goes in and takes over. Another concern is that diseases can travel with bees. Even though Varroa cannot survive in the desert, transporting bees between continents always carries risk. Just one infected individual slipping through could affect an entire region within a single season. History shows this clearly. Humans were the ones who moved Varroa from Asia to Europe, and to this day, not a single country has ever eliminated Varroa completely. Although the ecological risks are real, it cannot be denied that if managed properly, bees could become the ignition switch for the entire Sahara ecosystem. Because as long as trees begin to grow, bees will accelerate seed dispersal exponentially. A study in the Journal of Arid Environments shows that desert plant species dependent on bees can expand their vegetation coverage 32 to 60% faster compared to places without bees. This means every flower that blooms, every seed that gets carried farther, becomes a spark point for life. And when vegetation returns, animals follow in the exact order nature requires. Insects, birds, small mammals, predators. Ecological models in Niger have recorded that when tree density increased by 15%, insect numbers doubled, and just a few years later, insect-eating bird species began to return. But this is the moment we have to be honest with each other. Bees help plants reproduce, yes. They boost ecological recovery, yes. But all of that only happens when there is water. And in the Sahara, where ground temperatures can exceed 80 degrees Celsius, water is not just scarce, it has almost completely disappeared. Experts from UNEP once warned, no one can plant a forest in a place where both the soil and the air are trying to kill the trees. In the Sahel, many projects have failed for exactly this reason. Young trees compete with each other for water and then die all at once after just 2-3 years. In Mauritania, planting the wrong tree species even caused soil salinization, making already poor land even more useless. And here is the part very few people dare to say outright. If the Sahara truly becomes green, the planet could actually become hotter, not cooler. Sounds paradoxical, right? But that is science. A climate simulation from Wageningen University once concluded, greening the Sahara could increase the global average temperature by 0.3 to 0.7 degrees Celsius. The number sounds small, but for the world's climate, it is enough to disrupt rainfall patterns, monsoons, and ocean currents. When the Sahara is covered with vegetation, the surface color changes from bright to dark, causing it to absorb more solar energy. Currently, the Sahara reflects about 40–45% of sunlight back into space, an extremely high albedo. If it becomes shrubland or grassland, the albedo could drop to 15–20%. That means the planet receives an enormous amount of additional heat. On the other hand, the Sahara is not just a destroyer of life. It is also a nutrient factory that sustains this planet. Every year, the Sahara sends 400–700 million tons of dust into the atmosphere, forming massive dust plumes that can travel more than 8,000 kilometers, crossing the Atlantic and falling over the Amazon, the Caribbean, the Atlantic Ocean, and even reaching Japan. This dust is not waste, it is iron, phosphorus, and minerals, essential elements for life. In the ocean, iron is the limiting factor. When Sahara dust falls into the sea, it triggers explosions of phytoplankton, tiny organisms that produce more than 50% of the oxygen you breathe and form the base of the entire marine food chain. Without Sahara dust, phytoplankton decline, fish, squid, seabirds, and even whales all drop in a domino effect. And the Amazon, the largest green lung on Earth? A NASA study shows that the amount of phosphorus coming from the Sahara matches exactly the amount the Amazon loses each year through rainfall washout. Without the Sahara, the Amazon would become nutrient poor and weaken over time. Climate scientist Daniel Reshape said a sentence that startled the entire scientific community. If you change the Sahara, you change the entire nutrient circulation of the Earth. So, if we shrink the Sahara or accidentally turn it off with extreme greening programs, the world could lose its nutrient source for the oceans. The Amazon could decline, the climate could shift, and the stability of hundreds of countries could be affected. When looking back at the entire story, we realize the biggest paradox of all. To save the Sahara, people are not building more reservoirs, not creating more irrigated fields, but releasing bees into the desert. An idea that sounds crazy, yet it opens a lifeline for plants, for soil, and even for the bees themselves, which are struggling to survive against varroa and climate change. If this experiment succeeds, we will prove that sometimes the smallest heroes create the biggest changes on the planet. And now the question for you. Is releasing bees into the Sahara a brilliant solution or a dangerous gamble? Leave a comment. I want to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy strange journeys like this one, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming stories.